I heard on the phone that my wife's coworker often called me a loser and a scoundrel. When I told my wife about it, she started defending him. So I broke into her phone and checked her messages. It turned out they were having an affair. I thought my marriage was solid, until I overheard my wife's coworker calling me a loser and a scoundrel on the phone. When I confronted her, she defended him, brushing it off like I was imagining things. But then she started acting strange, more secretive, more distant. Something wasn't right. So I did what any suspicious husband would do. I broke into her phone. What I found shattered everything. I'm 34M, and my wife, Janice, is 32F. We've been married for 6 years, and up until recently, I thought we had a solid relationship. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but nothing that ever seemed out of the ordinary. We met in college, both studying business, and bonded over late-night study sessions and our mutual obsession with terrible reality TV. She eventually became a project manager at a marketing firm, while I worked in finance. Our life was routine, but comfortable, at least I thought so. Janice had always been social, the kind of person who made friends wherever she went. She talked about her coworkers often, especially one guy, Ryan, 35M. Ryan was her colleague in another department, and from how she spoke about him, he was just another friendly face in her office. I had no reason to suspect otherwise. That was until I overheard a conversation that changed everything. It started as just another evening. I was in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone while waiting for dinner to finish in the oven. Janice was in the living room, talking on the phone, her voice low but clear enough that I could catch bits and pieces of the conversation. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard my name. She was telling someone, Ryan, apparently, not to be so harsh. She insisted that I wasn't that bad, though she admitted with a laugh that, sure, I could be a little boring sometimes. That got my attention. I kept my eyes on my phone, but my ears were tuned in. Then I heard it, his voice, muffled through the speaker, but unmistakably condescending. He called me a loser. A scoundrel. Said he didn't even know how Janice put up with me. The words sat heavy in my stomach, a slow-spreading discomfort that I couldn't ignore. What struck me more than the insult itself was Janice's response. She didn't defend me, didn't push back, didn't even sound annoyed. She just chuckled like it was nothing. I walked into the living room, keeping my voice as casual as I could, and asked who she had been talking to. She flinched slightly before quickly ending the call. Just Ryan, she said. Work stuff. I told her it didn't sound like work. He had been talking about me. Janice barely hesitated before brushing it off. Ryan had been joking, she claimed. That was just his sense of humor, nothing personal. I was reading too much into it. I didn't like it. Not one bit. But I let it go, at least for the moment. What I didn't realize then was that this wasn't just an offhand comment from a rude coworker. It was the first crack in the foundation of my marriage. And soon those cracks would start to shatter everything. I tried to push the conversation out of my mind, but it lingered. Something about the way Janice had responded, or rather, the way she hadn't responded, didn't sit right with me. If one of my coworkers had insulted her, I would have shut it down immediately. I would have made it clear that no one talks about my wife that way. But Janice had laughed. Brushed it off like it was nothing. Over the next few days, I started noticing little things. Janice seemed to be on her phone more often, holding it at odd angles, subtly tilting the screen away from me whenever I walked by. It wasn't blatant, not at first, but once I was looking for it, I couldn't unsee it. She also started stepping away more frequently to take calls, often claiming they were work-related. That alone wasn't unusual. Her job had always been demanding, but the timing felt off. She'd disappear into the other room during dinner, come back with vague explanations, and barely touch her food. The late-night texts increased too. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see the faint glow of her phone as she lay beside me, fingers moving quickly across the screen before she'd turn it over and pretend to be asleep. And then there were the absences. Janice had always been social, but lately, she'd been skipping our usual plans more often than not. Drinks with her coworkers, late meetings that ran over, last-minute outings that didn't quite add up. I started keeping track in my head. Every time she went out, she came home just a little too cheerful, a little too distant, like she had to force herself back into the role of a wife. I told myself I was being paranoid. That I was reading into things because of that one phone call. Maybe Ryan was just an arrogant asshole, and Janice had laughed because she hadn't wanted to cause drama at work. Maybe I was overthinking it. But then, I heard it again. A few weeks later, I was in the hallway, passing by as Janice took another call. She was in our bedroom this time, door cracked just enough for sound to escape. I wasn't eavesdropping, at least, not intentionally, but I caught the tail end of a familiar voice. Ryan, and once again, he was calling me a loser. But this time, it wasn't just an offhand comment. He was annoyed. Frustrated. He said something about how I wasn't worth the effort, how Janice was wasting her time pretending. Pretending what? Janice didn't laugh this time. She sighed, sounding tired, like she was agreeing with him. That was the moment I knew something was going on. And I needed to find out exactly what. After that second phone call, doubt turned into certainty. Janice wasn't just brushing off Ryan's comments, she was letting them happen. Encouraging them, even. I started watching more closely. It wasn't just the late-night texts or the sudden work obligations. It was the way she started pulling away from me in subtle but deliberate ways. The way she stopped initiating affection, the way she barely made eye contact during dinner. The way she always seemed slightly irritated with me, like my presence alone was a burden. Then came the cancellations. Janice had always been busy, but she never used to cancel our plans last minute. Now, it was becoming a pattern. She'd agree to dinner with friends, then suddenly remember a work thing she couldn't miss. We had tickets to a concert she'd been excited about for months, but a last-minute project needed her attention. Each time, she assured me it wasn't a big deal, that we could reschedule, but we never did, and the worst part? She didn't even seem sorry about it. One night, she barely looked up from her phone as she told me she had to skip our usual Friday night movie. She mumbled something about meeting a coworker to go over reports, and I didn't even bother asking who. I already knew the answer. Ryan. I didn't confront her, not yet. I wanted proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I made my move. So I waited. I paid attention. And then, one night, I saw my opportunity. Janice was in the shower, and her phone was charging on the nightstand. Normally, she kept it glued to her hand, but this time, she had left it unattended. My heart was pounding as I picked it up, my fingers hovering over the screen. It was locked. Of course it was locked, but I knew the passcode. She had never changed it. Maybe she thought I wouldn't dare look. Maybe she had gotten careless. Either way, I entered the code and braced myself for whatever I was about to find, and what I found made my blood run cold. There, in her messages, was everything I had feared. Ryan wasn't just a rude coworker. He wasn't just an arrogant asshole who looked down on me. He was the man my wife had been sleeping with for the past month. The messages left no room for doubt. Flirty texts that turned into full-blown confessions of love, inside jokes about me, explicit exchanges that made my stomach churn. There were even pictures. Ones I wish I could erase from my mind. Janice hadn't just been pulling away from me. She had already left. I stood there, gripping the phone so tightly my hands were shaking. The sound of running water from the shower suddenly felt deafening. This was it. My marriage was over, and Janice had no idea that she was about to find out exactly what I was going to do about it. I stood there, staring at the messages, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Every doubt, every suspicion, every uneasy feeling I had ignored, it had all been real. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, had been sneaking around behind my back. And worse, she had been laughing about it. I scrolled through the messages, each one another stab to the gut. Ryan mocking me, calling me pathetic. Janice agreeing. Joking about how clueless I was. Saying she felt alive when she was with him. That our marriage had become a burden. I put the phone down before I did something reckless, like throw it against the wall. The shower shut off. For a brief second, I considered pretending I had seen nothing. Acting like I didn't know. But the anger, the humiliation, it was too much. Janice stepped out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, rubbing her hair dry. She barely looked at me as she reached for her phone. That's when I spoke. "How long have you been sleeping with him?" She froze. Her hand, inches from the phone, stopped midair. Her face strained of color. "What?" She whispered. I repeated the question, this time holding up her phone. Ryan. How long? Janice's breath hitched. I watched her mind race, scrambling for an excuse, a lie, anything to get out of this. But she saw my expression. Saw the phone in my hand. She knew there was no way out. I can explain. She started, her voice shaking. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Explain? What exactly is there to explain? The messages are right here, Janice. I read them. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was panicking now, eyes darting around like she could somehow escape this moment. It wasn't. She started, but I cut her off. Don't, I said, my voice low. Don't stand there and insult me by pretending this wasn't what it was. Tears welled up in her eyes. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just fear of what came next. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. I shook my head. You didn't just hurt me, Janice. You destroyed us. She collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. It was a mistake, she mumbled. It didn't mean anything. That sent a fresh wave of rage through me. I grabbed the phone again and scrolled to one of her messages, one where she told Ryan she loved him, that she wished she could wake up next to him instead of me. I turned the screen toward her. Didn't mean anything? I repeated. Because it sure looks like it meant something to you. Janice sobbed harder, but I felt nothing. No sympathy. No sadness. Just emptiness. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I want a divorce. Her head snapped up. Wait, no, please, it's over, I said, cutting her off. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. Janice shook her head frantically, reaching for me, but I stepped back. I was done. I walked out of the bedroom, grabbing my keys as I went. I needed air. Space. Anything but being in the same room with her. As I reached the front door, I heard her voice, small and broken. Please don't leave. I turned back, meeting her tear-filled eyes. You left first, I said. And then I walked out. I barely slept that night. My mind was caught between rage and disbelief, replaying everything I had read, everything she had said. By morning, one thing was clear. I was done. Janice spent the next day cycling through every excuse in the book. First, she sobbed and begged for forgiveness. Then she blamed me, saying she had felt lonely. When that didn't work, she got angry, accusing me of spying on her. I didn't engage. I told her flatly. You should have thought about that before you spread your legs for him. Then, as if on cue, Ryan called. He was smug, telling me to move on and that Janice wasn't really in love with me anymore. I let him talk, then laughed and said, I hope she ruins you too. Before hanging up, that night, Janice tried one last time. Is there really no way back from this? She asked, her voice shaking. I slid the divorce papers across the table. No, I said. There isn't. She signed the divorce, moved fast. I refused to argue, refused to entertain her guilt-ridden attempts at closure. I wanted out, and I made that clear. She cried through every step of it, but I didn't care. The woman who had laughed at my humiliation didn't deserve my sympathy. Ryan didn't stick around long. A few weeks after Janice moved out, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had started pulling away. Turns out, the thrill of sneaking around was the only thing holding them together. Without the secrecy, without me as the oblivious husband in the background, their little fantasy crumbled. Janice called me one last time, months after the papers were signed. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was quiet, hollow. She said she regretted everything. That she had lost too much. That she hoped one day I'd find it in my heart to forgive her. I deleted the message. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed her. Now, I live my life on my terms. No more walking on eggshells. No more ignoring red flags. I rebuilt myself from the ashes of our marriage, and for the first time in years, I feel free. As for Janice? She made her choice, and I never looked back.